What's going on, everybody? How y'all doing? What's going on, everybody? How you doing? God damn, how you doing? All right, man. I'm Justin Redrick, Bitcoin vegan. It's very ironic I'm at this damn conference, but we'll get to that later. But what Bitcoin means to me, so real quick, I found out about Bitcoin, and we'll go deeper into this tomorrow, but I found out about Bitcoin coming home from prison from 2011 and 2014. I found out about Bitcoin from my friend Bitcoin Zay, and I studied it every day in my mom's damn basement because what Bitcoin meant to me, what I realized was it was complete freedom. The very first thing that stood out to me when I was explained Bitcoin was decentralization. And I was like, so what the hell does that mean? It was like, well, it's outside of government control. So I said, okay, so in prison you have like prison stamps that you use for currency. So if you don't have money and your family, or you can't work and you can't swipe your card, you can't buy canteen. But if you have stamps on the yard, you can do business. So I was like, all right, well, shit. So Bitcoin reminded me of stamps. So it was already a way for me to see how it could work within the world. But what was the icing on the cake was the fact that it could not be confiscated in any regard and that it gave you 100% freedom. So we'll get into more of that tomorrow. However, there's going to be a bit of a change of plans. I'm going to invite the legend of Bit Block Boom, Gary Leland, to come up here and introduce his panel.
Hello, hello, hello. Oh my gosh, I can still walk up steps and I'm a boomer. That's kind of amazing in itself. Hey, before I get into introducing my guests, how many people here, by raising hands, have heard of paid placement? You see that in TV shows sometimes? Does anyone know what that is? Okay. Just wanted to make sure y'all knew what was going on because I don't want to give y'all any surprises here. Okay, let me get my notes out here and let's get going on this real quick. We got a great talk today. As he said, I'm Gary Leland, the Bitcoin boomer, founder of BitBlock Boom. Today we're going to discuss the efforts to drive the USA towards Bitcoin adoption and the assault on Bitcoin through media, policy, activism, and political action. Hold on one second. Okay. I like to take advantage of this stuff, okay? Now, I want to let everybody know the last 10 minutes I'm going to be asking questions out of the audience, so you might want to be thinking of your questions here now. And hold on a second. This is the last one, guys. I just got to get this done. I got to make this money, guys. Okay. How many people here need some help when orange pilling people? I mean, I know personally I have a really hard time, and I do it all the time, so I should be really good at it. But I don't think you can ever have enough ammunition, so that's what we got here today. So, find my notes here. I'm going to introduce my guest now. I have Natalie Brunell, a podcast host, an educator, media communicator in the Bitcoin space. Previously, she was a TV journalist, and I'm kind of envious on this. She has an Emmy for breaking news coverage. That's pretty cool. Let's give her a round of applause. That's pretty cool. That really is. Our second guest is Dennis Porter, a political strategist and Bitcoin advocate focused on protecting and defending Bitcoin users and Bitcoin mining through public policy. Come on up, my man. And I think I'm through with my paid placement, so I can get down into enjoying stuff. Oh my gosh, have a seat there. Okay, I got some questions here for y'all. I had y'all help me with these questions, actually, just to let everybody know. And they've seen these questions, so it's no surprise to anybody here. But Natalie, let's start with you. How do you think media covers Bitcoin? I think everybody knows, but let's start there first.
Yeah, so hi, everybody. I don't think the media covers Bitcoin enough, which is pretty much why I've taken on the role that I have. I was a broadcast journalist for more than 10 years, and during one of my gigs as a reporter in a town in Northern California, I heard about Bitcoin, and I remember pitching my first story about it, and it was just a struggle from the start because my bosses saw it as me shilling some sort of financial product that was going to lose our older viewers a ton of money. And so it was difficult to try to get the kind of coverage I wanted. And as I went down the rabbit hole, and in my last network that I worked for, I had this amazing boss who gave me a lot of leeway in terms of what I covered and what I investigated. And so I really wanted to cover the space, and I was able to do a couple of stories on Bitcoin mining and sort of what is Bitcoin. But I always was kind of forced to try to put in the other side. So I had to show the skeptics and basically put people on that were saying, well, this is going to destroy the planet because of energy, just to show that there's another side to it, right? And I almost feel like sometimes journalists, they want to appear, I don't know, like they have this edge and they're getting both sides by attacking something, when really they don't even fundamentally understand basic economics or the history of our monetary system. And so they're attacking it just to look like that, the cool reporter that's like, I'm gonna get him, I'm gonna get you on this. And so I think there needs to be more education. The media need to be more educated so that they do stories, so that they get the right sources, so that they have the right narrative and angle on it. And I think that, we need to educate the public in general. So I don't think that the media covers it enough, and I get very excited when I get called to do, news hits. But if you guys have noticed, I pretty much only get called by more conservative platforms. So I've never had the opportunity to speak on CNBC or CNN and some of the more left-leaning programs because for whatever reason, they haven't wanted to cover Bitcoin enough, so.
Well, I just have a question. What's Stuart Barney like? I'm joking. Dennis, what's your call on that?
I couldn't agree more with Natalie. The media in general has been very skeptical and a lot of negative coverage, and typically has been very focused on price. Like they're just constantly talking about the market going up and the market going down. One of the great things, that has been happening very recently is we've been seeing coverage of the uses of Bitcoin outside of its ability to store value, or by their perspective, be a speculative asset. Now we're seeing what's going on in Canada. They're covering the story up there. Where they're showing what's going on in Ukraine and Russia. Geopolitics is being discussed for the first time ever. I think the last phase where they started to print a shit ton of money all across the world really woke people up to this idea of like why the hard supply cap is important. But now we're starting to see them focus on the other aspects of why Bitcoin is so critical. Might be still getting negative coverage. I'm sure we'll cover that a little bit when it comes to evading sanctions. But they're starting to talk about this asset outside of just, is it going up or is it going down? And I think that's I think that's a really positive thing.
So you say there's a lot of negative media coverage on that. So you think there's a lot more negative than positive, and I'm sure everybody else hears. Could you give us an example of some FUD that we might be, what's the FUD of the day? I mean, we got a new one every 6 months. Dennis, could you start that off?
Yeah, I mean, it's very clearly that Bitcoin could be used to evade sanctions. And just going into that really quickly, Bitcoin is not very good for evading sanctions for a few reasons. And I think that it's important to constantly push back on these narratives so that we can educate the public. And one of the biggest things that they're talking about right now is, Russia is going to evade Western sanctions with Bitcoin, with cryptocurrency. We need to keep a skeptical eye of Bitcoin now because of this. Ultimately, we're just too early. Bitcoin's too small of an asset for the 11th largest economy on the planet to use as a medium of exchange. I think that narrative is just fundamentally broken. And so I think it just continues to be important that we push back on these negative narratives, but it's great to see organizations like the Bitcoin Policy Institute, Bitcoin Advocacy Project, be in a position where they can now get to regulators, get to legislators, and push back on these bad and dangerous approaches to what Bitcoin is used for.
Natalie, what is your Bitcoin FUD of the week? And if you have something we can use to overcome it that you think is the best thing.
Yeah, well, definitely I think of the week is the headline that potentially Russia will subvert the sanctions using cryptocurrency, therefore we shouldn't be for Bitcoin. But I'm gonna let you guys in on a little secret about news. We have a saying, if it bleeds, it leads. So all the headlines that I've ever covered are pretty much death and disaster and destruction, and that's what I spent more than 10 years reporting on. And so it seems like if there was a positive headline, it wouldn't lead the news because there has to be controversy because news likes to, kind of tap into that voyeur side of us. And that's how they make their money. And what's funny is people have asked me throughout my career, like, why does the news do that? Why do they lead with like the crime and the death and all that? And to be honest with you, actually, if you look into the history of television, they've tried to create broadcasts that are more positive news leaning, and they always fail because there's something in us that like drives us toward the destruction, I think, a little bit. So there's a lot of FUD. I think the media has invented a lot of the FUD headlines, whether it's, that this is destroying the planet, to this is used only by criminals, to now it's going to be used by countries to subvert sanctions, and like what's next. I'm sure there's going to be a new headline created, but again, I think this is why it's so important to educate the people that are not only the speakers, the anchors, the producers, the writers, but also the members of the public, so that when they're asked about it, they have educated responses.
Well, on that same subject, though, why, or I think everybody knows why, but what can we do to keep Bitcoin in the news or make it more pro-Bitcoin instead of FUD all the time? Because that's all I ever see. So is there anything people can do to actually change that aspect?
I mean, I just think it's education. So I had, no one told me, right, to read the books, and I'm sure all of you went down this path too, where you were maybe exposed to Bitcoin, you heard about it for the first time, you didn't understand it, perhaps you were skeptical, and then you had a second exposure and you maybe got a little bit more curious, maybe you read an article or two, then you went further down, and it's a process. Like going down the rabbit hole is a journey, and so you can't just send someone, an article and have them understand it and then suddenly change their coverage. For me, it was like basically over a year-long journey, and not only did I have to read books like The Bitcoin Standard and The Bullish Case for Bitcoin and Layered Money and really dig into the problems in our system, but for me, I think one of the reasons why I have an advantage in the field in terms of I'm one of the only media voices that seems to be covering Bitcoin in a positive way where I advocate for it and I want to educate people on it is because I was almost predisposed to the principles and the mission of Bitcoin because of my background. Like, I'm first generation. My goal is to help provide like I want there to be a renaissance of the American dream because I truly feel like it's dying, and I don't like the idea of living in a place where wealth inequality is ballooning. I feel like there should be more economic opportunity and more access for the average person to be able to make their lives better for their families. And so that's why I'm super passionate about Bitcoin, but it took me a while to really understand Bitcoin because I didn't understand what caused the problems and the division and the polarization that I was reporting on. But I knew there was a problem, and I think a lot of people, especially in the US, they have this feeling of being left behind or feeling like the system's broken and unfair, but we need to help them get there. Like, that's the gap, that's the bridge of like, you recognize there's a problem, Bitcoin is the solution, but here's why the problem exists and why Bitcoin was created, and like we need to get them over that hurdle.
I want to ask you, Dennis, a minute ago, Natalie said that her news coverage where she's been on TV has always been conservative, which is maybe basically saying more Republican. What can we do to make Bitcoin bipartisan so that's not the case? Because I think that's a real issue. So it's not bipartisan.
Yeah, to me, there's a few narratives here that I think are just kind of fundamentally wrong around Bitcoin. I think that Republicans have been well positioned to adopt Bitcoin because of the fact that they're the party out of power. And, when you're the party out of power, you're looking for ways to disrupt the status quo. And also, just Bitcoin naturally aligns with both sides of the aisle. So they're looking to disrupt the status quo. They love the freedom aspect. They love the censorship-resistant aspect. But Democrats love Bitcoin as well. Those on the left like Bitcoin as well. They love it for its ability to provide equality and equal access. They love it for its ability to help the middle class. So Bitcoin fundamentally is left and right, or you could say it's neither, really, right? And so it's really going to come down to getting people in a position where they can go on to these more left-leaning organizations and begin to build these relationships. It's more of a narrative thing right now. It's more of the politicians on the right have kind of picked this thing up and are running with it. But Democrats are very pro-Bitcoin as well. We've seen 10 Democrats get together and write a letter to Nancy Pelosi saying that they opposed the crypto tax reporting amendment that was slipped into the infrastructure bill. They opposed this bad Bitcoin legislation, and they weren't going to stand for it. Darren Soto, who helped write that letter, is ahead of the blockchain caucus in DC, right? These are Democrats. You have Ro Khanna, Darren Soto. You have guys like even Ron Wyden, who's doing help behind the scenes to make sure that the Bitcoin industry survives and thrives. He was one of the key players in making sure that the recent carve-out from the note sent to the Treasury and the IRS about excluding miners from the broker status, he was one of the key players in making sure that happened. So there are people on the left that do want to talk about Bitcoin and do want to champion Bitcoin, but I think it's going to take a little bit of a political shift in this country. I think it's going to take some people losing their office, losing their gavels, to be put in a position where they're starting to willing to fight for the disruption of the status quo. I think you're going to see a lot more of that as the next 2 to 4 years go on. Those of you that know, it's one of my major objectives to make sure Democrats and left-leaning states get on board. I'm close to a California legal tender bill. I'm close to some Democrats that are having conversations. They're very actively seeking ways that they can start to engage the community. Also, there's like a recent study that came out that like 60% of Bitcoin and digital asset holders are Democrats. So the voters are there. The desire to learn more about this asset is there. It's not a partisan thing. I just think Republicans were well positioned to pick up the mantle and run with it in the very beginning.
Okay, so Natalie, let me ask you. As Dennis said, everybody loves Bitcoin. That's good to hear, for sure. But what can we do, like as regular people here, to ensure that the U.S. keeps moving forward with this instead of staying stuck in the past? I mean, what would you say is the best thing we could do, or the best 2 things we could do?
Yeah, well, I think we all have to use our voices, and not enough people contact their local representatives. And I feel like we've kind of divided ourselves in these 2 teams. And really the thing that excites me most about Bitcoin is it's the one thing it seems like that can unify us in this crazy, crazy time that we live in. And so regardless of whether your representative happens to be on your team and you're red or blue or whatever, I think it's important to let them know that this is a topic that's important to you. I mean, certainly we're seeing that politicians are trying to better understand it because it's coming on their radar. I mean, whether their staffers hold Bitcoin or they're getting phone calls about it, or issues are coming up in the news, they are trying to get educated, and so we need to steer them in the right direction because kind of, off of what Dennis said, right now it seems like the Republicans, if you boil it down to maybe the most simple features of Bitcoin and you don't know a lot about it, you probably come away with, okay, small government, you don't want control, so small government, and freedom, which freedom, I don't know why, has become kind of a bad word lately. But so that sort of tends to veer right, and they don't realize that, hey, this is also banking the unbanked. This is offering financial inclusivity for minority groups and for people within classes that don't have access to capital and savings technologies. And so I think education is super important, and I think we all have our own small or medium or large communities that we exist in, and you're obviously passionate enough to come to a conference, so I think, whatever we can do to spread the message is just super, super helpful.
Well, Dennis, we're sitting here and following up on that. We're with a bunch of people here who love Bitcoin. This isn't some conferences where people are asking, or hopefully not going to ask stupid questions like
a wallet question.
Yeah, like Bitcoin, isn't it like dangerous or something? So I think we have a lot of people who love Bitcoin, but what I want to know is how can other people here help ensure their community is moving into Bitcoin? Because that's where I think we can make a bigger difference, is on the local level, and that in itself will help the national level move into Bitcoin. So what would you recommend people do on the local level?
I mean, this is a saying that politics is local, so when you engage with your local lawmakers, those are the ones that go to DC and they represent you. Also get engaged with the state lawmakers. Those are the ones that are going to help with the bottom-up approach to passing Bitcoin legal tender. If you want your state to be the first state to pass Bitcoin legal tender, go start talking to your local lawmakers. Go start talking to your state officials. They are very susceptible to the influence that you could provide. These guys want to learn. They want to be educated on Bitcoin. But I want to go back to something about the bipartisan issue here. It's critical that Bitcoin maintain itself as a bipartisan issue. The reason why is because if one of these parties decides to oppose Bitcoin, decides to be against this asset, 50% of the time, we'll be battling against bad policy instead of 100% of the time having both parties compete for better policy. We want them to compete. That's competition always delivers better results. And so it's a very, very important mission of mine to make sure that Bitcoin maintains itself as a bipartisan issue in this country. That is going to be able to drive adoption forward. That is going to stop us from having all of these people, whether it be the left, could be the right. When the right gets into power, you know how it is. Things shift. All of a sudden they have the power over the money printer. Now they don't like Bitcoin so much, right? It's very possible that something like that could happen. So both sides need to get a good focus and make sure that we are staying in touch with our local lawmakers, staying in touch with our federal officials, and I have built tools that make it super easy for you to do that. So if you go to singleissuevoter.com, you can use one of the tools that I've provided right now. You can go there, you can send a message to your state lawmakers and your federal officials in like 60 seconds or less. You can say, I want to vote for legal tender, or I'm a single issue voter, or I want to protect proof of work mining. There's all sorts of different campaigns that are being run right now, and I think it's very important that you make your voice known. That's how the political process works in this country.
I just want to add a little note to that because I was very concerned that Bitcoin's message could be hijacked by one party and then automatically it is just that, and the other one, just by virtue of default, has to be against it. And that's one of the things that I hate about the situation in our country right now. And for me, one of the reasons why I get passionate about bipartisan Bitcoin, and we've partnered on some Twitter spaces, is because over my 10 years as a reporter, I became very jaded about politics, and I came to distrust every politician, no matter what side of the aisle they were on, because on a daily basis, I would be reporting on the same issues, ballooning, and some guy blames another guy and pledges that he'll be different, and we elect him, and they spend a bunch more money, and the problem's even bigger. Right? And so I would get passionate about it and frustrated because clearly, again, there's something broken. And I don't care if you're red or blue. This is not a red or blue issue. It's not a purple issue. This is like the chance to create this beautiful future and access to financial inclusivity and wealth accumulation for future generations so that we can actually start thinking about the future. Because people that I met as a reporter, they've given up hope. Like, hope is, I think, at a deficit in the United States, and there have been a bunch of politicians that run on the platform of hope, but like, where do we actually see it in our communities? Poor people are basically helping each other because there's not enough to go around, and it feels like everyone feels disenfranchised from the system. And if we just had a money that actually maintained and grew in value, people wouldn't feel so frustrated. They could plan for their families, they could plan for a future, the system would feel more fair. And I think that it would level the playing field a lot. And that, personally, when I was reporting, that was the biggest thing that I came away with, is people just feeling like everything's unfair and there's nothing that will fix it. And that's because most of them didn't understand Bitcoin.
Real quickly, I think that something that's really important that Natalie touched on here is this
Losing control here.
Yeah, this idea of, being disenfranchised. Politics doesn't work, right? I agree to some extent that we need to make sure we're building networks and protocols and systems that are outside the government control. But it's very important that you do not lose hope in the political process here. If you think that you can just wake up, though, and just vote, that's not going to work. Like, we need to become extremely engaged. We don't need to become disengaged. We need to become more engaged in the political process. You need to be writing letters. You need to be going to meetings. You need to be contributing to candidates that are running on Bitcoin. You need to be contributing to the opponents of people like Brad Sherman, who are opposed to Bitcoin, and Elizabeth Warren, who is opposed to Bitcoin. You need to be making your voice heard. After the crypto tax reporting amendment process, one of the biggest takeaways in DC, you want to know what it was? We do not ever want to go through that process again with the Bitcoiners. They are wild. They will come, they will call, they'll write letters, they'll donate. No. We don't want to do that again. So just know that you are having an impact, but there's a certain threshold you have to have. You have to become extremely loud. If just 3 to 4% of this country becomes extremely loud on Bitcoin, we can completely change everything. If 3 to 4% of this country says, we will only accept Bitcoin, we will only vote for pro-Bitcoin candidates, it'll be game over. So just realize that only a very small amount of us need to get to that point, and we can win the United States over. We can orange pill the USA.
Okay, thank you. Very good point. Okay, just want to get everybody ready. We're going to ask questions, let you ask questions after this question, but it's going to be shorter than it was going to be. So, as you know, I wrote the book, helped write the book, Bitcoin and the American Dream. And there's a lot of people who have never, ever had the opportunity to see the American dream. They just haven't. How can Bitcoin help? And I'll let you start, Natalie. How can Bitcoin help people realize the American dream?
Well, I'm so excited you mentioned that book because I actually just finished it on this trip. I was gifted it at the ski summit, and I think it's a fabulous book. You guys should pick it up. It's a very fast read, and it just hits every point of how Bitcoin is, it offers economic opportunity to folks that are minorities, that are different races, different genders, LGBTQ, immigrants, boomers, young people. Like, it just covers the whole spectrum so that if a political officer were to pick it up, they would really get just like a very, very nicely written summary of why Bitcoin is great for America and why they should embrace things like Bitcoin mining and the technology behind it and the innovation and competition that's happening within the space. So for me, the American dream is really about economic opportunity. I mean, it's the reason my family wanted to come here. My parents grew up in Poland, and they saw what happens when a country falls under communism, and there was no access to essentially economic opportunity. There was no sense of like upward mobility and making your life better and having your kids, achieve something. And so they came here with that specific goal in mind, that as long as you work hard and you get an education, pretty much anything is possible. Now, that's not to say that everyone's going to be equal, because one of the reasons I'm passionate about Bitcoin is I do believe it will create and incentivize a more egalitarian community and economy. But that doesn't mean that every single person is going to be equal and we're not going to have any wealth inequality, because I think people come to the table and have different desires, motivations, levels of intelligence and time that they're willing to invest in learning a skill, for example. But I do think that the playing field should be leveled in terms of the access to the economic opportunity. So like, if you really want to make it, it's not as difficult as it is right now. And what I saw is, like, with my family, the goalpost would keep moving. Every year, things would get more and more expensive, and it was harder and harder to achieve the quote-unquote American dream. And here we are. I'm a millennial, and my friends are all memeing about how none of us can afford a house, and none of us can plan for a retirement, none of us can have kids because it's going to be too expensive and the climate's going to destroy the planet. So, like, that's really sad. It's really sad that in the superpower and the number one country in the world, we're saying that we basically can't afford the basic things that our parents could. So for me, it's like economic opportunity, number one, and the rest, it's like, it's this, self-determination, which, is fundamental to capitalism. Like, you determine your future and your destiny, and I believe in that.
Okay, Dennis, before you answer, we're running out of time, and I do want to get some questions in. So if you have a question, go ahead and get to the mic. Dennis, would you answer?
Yeah, to me, it all comes down to the way we treat money in this country. The way we've treated money has led to the destruction of the socioeconomic ladder. The Fed and those in charge of the economic system have taken that ladder and they have thrown it into the fire. It is completely destroyed. Those at the bottom have next to zero opportunity and chances to climb up the ladder. And so I think Bitcoin rebuilds that ladder. It not only gives people this incredible savings technology for the first time ever, they can work hard and get ahead. It also starts to kind of take out the incentive for people to park all their money in real estate. Like, we all know this, that Bitcoin is the ultimate money. It's the best store of value on the planet. And because of that, it's going to extract value from these things that really shouldn't have monetary value in them, which are like homes. And homes will become cheaper, more affordable, while individuals are saving more money at a faster rate. Wages are underperforming the price of homes. So homes are, for the first time ever, going up faster than wages. That is a real problem for the average American, and I think that Bitcoin will be the first thing that can actually help us to flip the script on that story.
Okay, and what's your question, sir?
So I just want to know, so when it comes to the government, what do you think the number one biggest threat is, as opposed to, what do you think they could do? What's the biggest thing that would be the most impactful negatively against Bitcoin?
So what's the biggest
What
threat the
law
U.S. could do
or,
to Bitcoin?
Yeah, combined, bill, something. What?
Dennis?
Yeah, to me, I mean, when this is something that we talk about a lot with those in DC. To me, really, the critical one is the right to self-custody. I think it's very important that we all get behind what Congressman Warren Davidson is doing. He created the KYC Keep Your Coins Act, and it protects the right to self-custody and protects the right to peer-to-peer transactions. So that, to me, is the big one, because as soon as they take away self-custody, it's all centralized again. We're just right back to the same old system we used to be in before. So if you hear about, if you get an opportunity, go donate, go contribute, support Congressman Warren Davidson in his efforts to do that. I'm also going to be working on another bill here soon, lobbying for another bill called the Bitcoin Act, which is broadly going to bring all the various types of things the Bitcoin community wants to see happen in the next 5 to 10 years, and that would be one of the things that are part of it.
Natalie, what could the U.S. do to hurt Bitcoin? That's the question.
Well, I mean, I think that they could try to ban it, they could overregulate it, they could try to tax it too much, tax unrealized gains, but at the end of the day, I think that those will all hurt competition and hurt America's ability to be a superpower, honestly, because I think at this point we need Bitcoin. So I think that they could try these things, but in the same way that you can't kill the internet, ultimately maybe this will lead to the price maintaining volatility, or we slow down adoption a little bit, because for sure policy affects adoption. But I don't think in the long run any of this matters, because they can't stop it. So
Okay.
Real quick, let's be clear. Bitcoin always wins. Bitcoin will not lose. But the United States can lose, just like China lost. And we want to do everything in our power to make sure that we are headed in the same direction as El Salvador and the opposite direction of where the CCP has gone.
Question, sir?
Yes. Thanks for this section. It was very inspiring. My question is, if you can say it with Eric Adams, the mayor of New York that wants to apply with Bitcoin and plug in Bitcoin, what suggestion will you give to the mayor for the next 4 years?
Natalie?
Thanks.
yeah, well, I would love to sit down with him and help him understand Bitcoin a little bit better, because, he said he was for Bitcoin, but not for Bitcoin mining. So clearly, that's a big concern, because he doesn't understand the network. He doesn't understand how the whole system functions. So I think that's really concerning. I think he needs, look, we all have to be, I think, a little bit nicer about the whole thing, because people just need to learn. They don't understand what they don't know. They need someone helping them, sometimes holding their hand. And I think that it's incumbent upon us to do that, so that we can spread the word of Bitcoin, because I'm sure that he has the best of intentions, like many of the people who seek elected office. He wants to help, and sometimes it just turns into muddy waters, especially with a brand new technology that most people don't understand.
Yeah, following up there, I couldn't agree more with Natalie. When we approach elected officials, they say, oh, they work for us. How many people in here, have you ever been an employer? You ever had employees? Raise your hand if you've had employees, right? How many times have you gone to your employees and said, you work for me, this is what you need to do? What kind of a response do you usually get when you talk to your employees that way? Think of it the same thing with these elected officials. Talk to them like with respect. Talk to them like you want them to be on your team, because we ultimately do want them to be on our team. And if we're respectful and we're nice and they still don't do what we want them to do, we remove them from office. That's how the system works, right? So couldn't agree more. Be nice. Play nice until you have to play mean, I guess I could say there.
Yeah, that doesn't mean don't hold their feet to the fire. Like, we're not lapdogs, we're watchdogs. At least that's my mission. But yeah, no, I think, you got to respectfully educate them and help them see the light, lead them to the water and hope they drink it. And if they don't, kick them out of office.
Because let's be clear, if you are against Bitcoin mining and you say you're for Bitcoin, you do not understand Bitcoin. You're not for Bitcoin. You cannot be opposed to Bitcoin mining and be for Bitcoin.
Okay, we're out of time. Before we go, I really don't care. Is there anything you want to leave them with, like in a minute, or one last comment, Natalie?
No, I'm just super impassioned, and I am inspired to see so many people here and at all the conferences I go to. And so it's just, spread the message in your communities, hold events, send someone Bitcoin, make sure if you have a business, you accept Bitcoin. I mean, just really, I think we all can make a difference in our small communities, and those have ripple effects outward. And I'm just super excited to see all of you guys here.
Dennis?
If you don't want to get involved with the political process, build a business. It's the #1 way to incentivize elected officials. I was recently speaking to Congressman Pete Sessions, and one of the main reasons why he's talking about trying to meet with the CEOs of the publicly traded mining companies and why he's trying to become a leader on Bitcoin today is because the Whinstone facility is in his district. So build a Bitcoin business, incentivize them to start learning about Bitcoin.
I do want to let you know this is the first time I've moderated a panel, but I couldn't have had two better people on my panel. Let's give them a big round of applause.
Thank you.